Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today, which is Guidelines for Securing Fiori Solutions, given by our security guru. He's our practice lead, Gary Prewett. My name is Sarah Lotman. I am the practice lead of SAP User Experience here at NIMBL. And before I hand things over to Gary, I want to talk a little bit about what NIMBL is all about, and then give just a high-level overview of what Fiori is. NIMBL is an SAP consulting firm located in beautiful Denver, Colorado. We specialize just in SAP. We do not work with any other ERP software. We're about 100 consultants strong. And one thing I'd like to highlight is the average years of expertise per consultant is 7. And if you look at the industry, that is much better than average. And so when it comes down to our service offerings, as you can see here, we focus on all kinds of different areas related to SAP. But the 3 things I want to focus on today is Solution Manager. We do the entire Solution Manager wheel, ALM testing. We also have a large AMS practice. We have Basis, specialize in security, and have a good ABAP development team as well. And then finally, we have a dedicated UX practice. And that's really what this webinar is about, Fiori, but we also specialize in personas as well. So like I said before I hand things over to Gary, I want to cover what exactly Fiori is and why there is so much buzz about it in the SAP user community. Fiori is truly SAP's UI of the future. They have made heavy investments in this technology. And so I want to give a little history. Fiori came out about 2 years ago. And it started out as just a small subset of the most common applications. And it was segregated just to ECC and really around ESS, MSS space. So it came out, 25 applications. They rolled it out, and they charged a license cost for it. So it wasn't widely adopted, but those customers that did adopt it raved about how wonderful, how easy it was to use, and really demanded more applications to be made. So over the last 2 years, SAP has come out with 360 plus out-of-the-box applications. And now instead of just running on ECC, it spans your entire SAP landscape. CRM, SRM, GRC, you name it, there's probably an application for that module. One big benefit of Fiori is that it allows you to run anywhere. I think a common misconception is that Fiori is simply a mobility solution, and that's just not the case. Yes, Fiori runs fantastic on mobile and tablet devices, but it is also quite suitable for a desktop solution. So the whole premise behind Fiori is that the end user is going to have a consistent user experience no matter what device they're on and no matter what SAP module you are working in. So what does Fiori look like? Truly it looks like anything that you want. That center graphic there shows you what you get when you install Fiori and configure the Launchpad. But you can truly customize it to anything that you want it to be. And another thing I want to highlight is that as an SAP customer, you are not limited to those 360 plus out-of-the-box applications that SAP provides. It's built on an open web framework, so you can build custom scenarios for really anything within SAP that you can imagine. So with that, I am going to hand it over to our practice lead of security, Gary Prewett, and he is going to cover security from a Fiori standpoint.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. Good morning and afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go back a couple slides in the deck for those of you following along and talk through the agenda. So here's today's agenda. Quick introduction of today's webinar. Sarah Lotman and I have spent a lot of time talking through security considerations of Fiore deployments. A lot of these are public-facing, higher degree of risk or higher risk level for customers. We wanted to pass along our lessons learned in today's webinar, basically give you kind of a holistic understanding of some of the security considerations for your Fiore deployments. These are pretty complex deployments. They extend outside the data center and they cross regional and sometimes national boundaries. There's a little more complexity when it comes to information security. So we wanted to talk through, again, a holistic overview of what security considerations need to be considered for Fiore deployments, and also give you the tools that you need to handle and address and react to security issues, not just now, but throughout the life cycle of your solution. It's kind of sobering to think that Fiore solutions deployed in 2014 are probably going to be existing and operating in the coming decade. So, the security threat landscape in 2020 is going to look a lot different than it does today. That said, we'll talk through some of the common security issues for Fiore deployments. Talk about endpoint security. We'll talk about architecture. We'll talk a little bit about hardening, security configuration. We'll go into the traditional authentication and authorization components of Fiore applications. And then we'll wrap up a little bit with secure software development. You can enhance and extend the functionality of Fiore applications, and when you do that, there's certain things that you want to keep in mind. Then we'll finally wrap it up with some more information and then a Q&A session at the end. So now I'm going to go ahead and jump a couple of slides ahead of where Sarah left off, and we're going to talk about the security program scope. This is a framework that I'm presenting today that's based on PCI. There's a lot of frameworks out there, ISO 17799, COBIT, GASP, you're still using GASP. But this one's PCI based. A lot of customers are deploying Fiore apps in a sales order entry scenario. So this is applicable for some customers. You'll notice that these topics map pretty cleanly to the PCI Dirty Dozen for those of you who are PCI level 1 or level 2 merchants. But these boxes in green, the authorization and authentication boxes, are what most people think of when they think of SAP security. It's your roles and authorizations. And there's really a lot more that needs to be considered when you're talking about an information security program that encompasses SAP solutions. So today we wanted to extend that and talk about these areas in the dark green here. And definitely cover some of the, like I said before, network architecture, secure configuration, secure software development. Again, a lot of this is overlaps. It's not just the security team that's overseeing this implementation. There's your basis team that's doing a lot of this security setup and monitoring, and also your developers. And I think there's a tendency in a lot of organizations to assume the basis guys assume the security guys are handling things, and the security guys assume the basis and the developers are handling things. There's a lot of room for misinterpretation and miscommunication, potentially a lot of gaps there. So this is again, holistic framework that allows you to kind of consider all the security considerations that all of these technical teams need to be cognizant of. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about endpoint security, which is, I think, what most people think of when they're talking about Fiore or mobile deployments. How do we deploy these to mobile devices in a secure manner? And I thought I'd start this discussion by kind of talking about what's out there today. There's a few vendors out there, security vendors, Symantec, Trend, IBM's X-Force, that put out threat reports on an annual and semi-annual basis. And this is just a summarized overview of the mobile-specific threats that are out there from Symantec. This is Symantec's 2014 threat report. The URL's at the bottom there if you guys want to go and read this for yourselves. few key points around mobile devices. This is a look back. This is a 2014 threat report, but it's a look back to 2013, which is already 10 whole months ago. But there's one thing they noticed was increased emphasis on mobile malware. There's a lot of remote attack Trojans, and this started with the OBAD Trojan back in 2012. They started, some of these became increasingly common in 2013, and they're becoming more sophisticated as time goes on. There's a couple of common application or attack vectors that an attacker will use. One is they'll package it with a legitimate application. Give away a free app, for Minecraft, $6.99 on the Google Play Store. You can find that for free, but you got to understand there's going to probably be extra stuff that's associated with it. They also use Java-based delivery via spear phishing attacks, and they also, deploy legitimate applications or applications with legitimate functions. So I think the Apple Store last year was getting one new application per minute that they were releasing the Apple Store, and that's increasing over time. They don't have the time to do the due diligence around the Apple Store apps. Are they malicious apps? Are they semi-malicious? No one knows. So those are the three common attack vectors. These kind of compare and contrast to the four common ways that PCs are attacked. Pretty similar phishing vectors, but they would use your traditional Adobe Flash, Adobe Acrobat Reader, Java-based attacks, and I'm forgetting the other one, Shockwave. Those are the big four attack vectors that they use for PCs. Right now, there's three primary ones for mobile devices, but they are definitely out there, and there's an increased focus on getting malware onto mobile devices. Just a quick overview of the threat classifications. 2013, what do these things do? What do these pieces of malware or grayware do? A lot of them are track users, which is kind of ubiquitous now. If you look at you download Android apps onto your phone, you're going to commonly get prompted to have this application be able to view your call log or to view your geographic location. And a lot of why does the doodle jump guys need to know where you're physically located or what calls you're making? I don't know. But tracking users is one common component of malware. Also, a lot of them are out there to steal information. They're looking for usernames and passwords for that's banking and so on and so forth. And then you have your traditional threats, your backdoors and downloaders, which are basically your remote command and control systems that allow an attacker to take complete control of your iPhone, Android, BlackBerry. So there's a lot going on out there. There's a lot of increasing activity in the mobile space. I also thought I'd wrap this section up by talking about mobile vulnerabilities. Kind of interesting. This is, again, from the Semantic report. Last year, in 2013, Apple iOS released 108 fixes for vulnerabilities. Android released 17. BlackBerry and Nokia released one each. So my expectation is that this trend will continue in 2014. There are vulnerabilities out there today we're not aware of. They're going to have to be fixed here in the future. So what can you do about that? There are two common SAP tools that I wanted to mention when it comes to managing security on mobile devices. A lot of you have probably heard of both of these. Fiori is one of them. Fiori is a mobile device management tool for SAP. Gives you device and security management, pretty granular security policies with Fiori. You also can do some remote support, incident management. You also have the ability to configure the device and support the device. You can also deploy applications on that. So in a Fiori context, there's a Fiori client application that's available in the App Store or the Google Play Store that you can download, and you can actually download to your Fiori system and push that out to your mobile devices that are under your management control. And then also, again, I mentioned the granular device security policies. These are pretty granular, and they give you things like application whitelisting and blacklisting. They give you the ability to enforce passwords on your devices, so on and so forth. So pretty good solution to control security on your endpoints. You can also leverage a lot of any other MDM tool that you might have already. So if you've got an AirWatch deployed in your system, definitely encourage you to use AirWatch to manage the systems that are connecting to your Fiori applications. Good technology, McAfee. There's a lot of MDM tools out there. I do think that the Afaria tool set is a little more geared towards SAP solutions. It will give you more flexibility when it comes to Fiori. And then I also wanted to mention Makana, SAP Mobile App Protection by Makana. It's a great solution if you're wanting to treat your devices as already compromised. So if you're taking the approach that, my sales force is probably going to have malware on their device, but I still want to be able to deploy applications securely to them, then Makana is the tool that you want to look at. So it basically does data at rest encryption for the application. In this case, it'd be the Fiori client application. So you can basically run your applications in an encrypted sandbox. Strict cut and paste functionality. It also establishes encryption from the application. So with your iPhones and Android devices, you commonly have VPN capabilities at the device level. Malware on that device can inspect that traffic. If you establish that VPN or tunnel from your application, it's much more difficult for an attacker to inspect that traffic. So it's a great way to secure communications to and from your data center. And then you can also have the remote application wipe capabilities. So in case someone leaves the company, you can make sure that data stays with you and doesn't go with the individual. Next topic, architecting for security. This is an area that I've seen a lot of SAP customers have challenges in. And so I wanted to bring some of those common pitfalls to the forefront today. In the next slide, slide 14, you see a sample or representative infrastructure network diagram that kind of shows the clients connecting to your gateway server, which is where your Fiori applications would be deployed, and then communicating back to your back-end data sources here, your ERP and CRM systems in this case. You also have these systems connected to your Afaria server to get their security policy updates and communicate their security posture to Afaria. That then has a back-end component, basically a database component, as well as some other back-end services that you can deploy with Afaria. The main point to make here, there's 4 key points. You guys might want to come back to this slide later on, but we'll jump to the next one. Firewalls. I've seen customers use these. Most customers have a firewall. You want to use these to minimize your application attack surface areas. So definitely use them, and I would deploy a DMZ. So all of your external devices outside your 4 walls connecting to your data center or your colo, should be filtered through a firewall so that they only can connect to applications that you want them to connect to. And then it's also useful, we mentioned PCI earlier, from a scoping and from an audit perspective, you can, from a PCI perspective, minimize your the traffic that's being basically a PCI auditor would review in a assessment, in one of their PCI assessments. You can minimize that to just your DMZ only. You also, in your DMZ, you want to make sure you enforce some business logic here. This is an area that a lot of customers don't do. A lot of customers deploy Web Dispatcher, which is a reverse proxy, great product. It's free for all SAP customers. The challenge with Web Dispatcher, though, is that it does not really offer you application protection for your application. So application attacks, a Web Dispatcher is going to proxy those back. kind of blissfully unaware of that injection attack or a cross-site request forgery is going on. So your web dispatcher does not enforce business logic. What you do have when you deploy, I'm going back a slide, when you deploy your NetWeaver gateway in the DMZ or your Fiori server in the DMZ, you are actually enforcing business logic, application logic in the DMZ before you send that back into your trusted data center. And that's pretty important from an information security architecture perspective. And again, the last point from a DMZ perspective, I would treat these as semi-trusted. So you really want to minimize what services systems in your DMZ have access to back in your data center. Great example of this, if you're deploying Windows systems in your DMZ, you want to either have them in a separate domain or just have them as standalone systems. You don't want them trusted with your domain. If you do associate them with your Active Directory domain, you have to open up a bunch of different services in order to allow them to communicate, which again can be exploited by an attacker too. If they were able to compromise that system in your DMZ, they'd pretty easily be able to get back into your corporate network. So treat those devices in your DMZ as semi-trusted, and that's going to go a long way towards ensuring security of your solution over the lifetime of your application. And then last here I have last but not least, the web application firewalls. I wanted to mention these. A lot of SAP customers have web application firewalls in place today. If you have them, use them. It definitely makes sense. You have real-time visibility into your attacks and attack trends that you can figure out what attackers are trying to do, how they're adapting to try to compromise applications. And you can also augment application logic. So if you do deploy a vulnerable Fiori application, you can detect that and then mitigate that on your web application firewall. Basically, it's an extension of your application. So it gives you a lot of flexibility to adapt to new threats that might occur over the lifetime of your solution. So with that, let's go ahead and move to security configuration. Security configuration, basically think of this as hardening. When you're deploying a new Linux or Unix or Windows box and making it publicly accessible, a lot of organizations, if they don't, they should have a standard hardening guide that they follow, disabling non-essential services, applying patches, and so forth. Fiori solutions are no different. We've talked about endpoint security and security configuration there. We'll talk about application security in the future in the next set of slides. But I wanted to talk about the gateway specifically. That's the one piece of infrastructure within your solution that's in your data center that's exposed to the world. So probably one of your more critical pieces of infrastructure in your Fiori solution. You want to spend some time hardening your NetWeaver gateway. You want to be able to leverage your NetWeaver 7.4 if you can, if you're deploying a new NetWeaver gateway landscape for a Fiori solution. You want to install latest and greatest 7.4. You can get additional authentication options now. You have SAML integration, X509 certificate authentication, etc. that you can take advantage of. You also want to make sure you harden your application server. You harden your gateway services. You also want to minimize the ICF services that you enable, so your Internet Connection Framework and your T-code SICF. You want to make sure that you're only enabling and exposing the applications that you want to enable and expose. Again, if you have a need to expose some applications internally and some externally, you can actually leverage your web dispatcher in this scenario to do some URL filtering in the mod rewrite mod available in web dispatcher to restrict what external people can access versus internal people. You also want to spend some time on your RFCs. Your gateway, NetWeaver gateway is communicating back to your backend systems over using trusted RFCs. So you want to spend some time hardening RFC connections or disabling anonymous RFCs if that's allowed on your system and so on. And then you want to do things like enable encryption for your web traffic. You want to encrypt your single sign-on tickets if you're using those in your solution. You want to encrypt your RFC connections and so on. If this is of more interest to you, please let me know. NIMBL does have a standard set of steps that we follow when we're deploying ABAP AS systems. So we can definitely share that with you if you'd like to learn more about the specific detailed steps you want to follow to harden NetWeaver Gateway. Our next section is Authentication and Authorization, or Authorization Authentication, if you like. This is kind of, if you haven't been exposed to Fiori applications before, it's kind of it's a little nebulous concept. I wanted to make that a little less nebulous for you guys today. Fiori solutions use ABAP AS security. So here we've got a mobile Salesforce, Todd Witter guy he's connecting to our NetWeaver gateway. In the architecture diagram we had show you earlier is a slimmed down version of this. He's connecting to the NetWeaver gateway. He's authenticating basically using his user master credentials, set up in the gateway instance using SU01. He's getting his username, presenting credentials to the ABAP AS. He's getting a set of roles and or profiles that you've assigned to him in SU01. He's then making a trusted connection back to the backend system to get the data that he needs to populate the Fiori application. This is using a trusted RFC connection. So it's asserting that if he's Twitter in this case on the NetWeaver gateway, that he's going to have the same access that Twitter has on the ERP system on the back end. So this is a more detailed workflow that kind of explains how the whole process works. Again, you have your credentials asserted here. You can use whatever authentication types are supported by the NetWeaver gateway, the version of the NetWeaver gateway that you have deployed. And 7.4 gives you a lot of options, including the basic username and password. You can leverage, you can use SAML, you can use X509 certificates to simplify sign-on for mobile Salesforce folks. Once those credentials are asserted and accepted, the user will get the roles that are assigned to him on that gateway client. Again, these are standard roles that you would go into PSCG to modify. You actually, on the application roles, there's not much to modify on the gateway. It's kind of all or nothing access that you get there. Once you get your access on the gateway, you're then going to use that trusted RFC to assert your credentials onto the ERP system in this case. With that trust relationship, ERP is going to map your credentials to your gateway credentials to your ERP credentials. So Twitter on the gateway ERP is going to assume that Twitter is the user that's authenticating back to the ERP system. Because of this, there's a tendency for a lot of customers to think that the gateway isn't as critical. They have different types of, they might care about removing user access from the ERP system, but forget about the users out there on the gateway. And it's really critical that the same policies that govern your ERP system govern your gateway system. You're basically, primarily because ERP is trusting the credentials that your NetWeaver gateway is asserting. So you want to make sure that your policies and procedures are consistent across both systems. And again, on the ERP system, you're getting OData roles that are assigned to your user master in SU01, and these OData roles can be modified in PFCG. The SAP delivered ones have use a lot of standard SAP authorizations, so you'll find authorization objects, not transactions or T-codes, but authorization objects that allow them access to that backend data. So not a lot of black magic here. At first blush, it may seem a little nebulous, but if you've done NetWeaver security for very long, it's going to be pretty easy to take on handling security for your Fiori solution. Last but not least, I wanted to mention secure Fiori developments. So we mentioned application security issues previously. We mentioned web application firewalls can help mitigate a lot of these. I wanted to go over a little bit about what web application vulnerabilities you should be caring about, and a great framework for understanding that is a project called OWASP. OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Project. They have a website, owasp.org. They release a top 10 list every few years. Right now it's the 2013 list of top 10 web application vulnerabilities. OWASP is a great resource for understanding application vulnerabilities and keeping current on trends. A good example, this injection vulnerability showed up in the very first OWASP list back in 2004. 2007 it dropped to number 2. Cross-site scripting became a bigger risk, but injection has become the top vulnerability ever since in the 2010 list and the 2013 list. 2020, I couldn't tell you what's going to be number 1. Injection will probably be towards the top, but keeping current on the OWASP top 10 allows you to stay current on threat trends for web applications. So great resource out there. Strongly encourage you to go to owasp.org and visit look at the top 10 site. It explains to you what these vulnerabilities are and how you can address them. Common ways to address things like injection or cross-site scripting. And again, I don't know how many of you security practitioners on the call today are infrastructure guys. Personally, I am an infrastructure person that came into security as opposed to an application developer that came to security. In my opinion, it's a lot easier to train a developer on infrastructure security issues than it is to train an infrastructure person on application security issues. So that said, if you are in that boat where you're an infrastructure person trying to understand the application security, OWASP's a great resource to utilize. So what does that mean for organizations that are customizing Fiori applications? Some common best practices for deploying enhanced or modified Fiori applications. Follow about best practices. So a lot of organizations that do this already, they don't do call transactions. They use authority checks. They don't pass user input into open SQL statements without validation, so on and so forth. Code inspectors been available since, Sarah might correct me on this, I want to say 2010, 2011, to scan ABAP source code for common vulnerabilities. You still want to use Code Inspector for your Fiori applications. For the web-specific component, you definitely want to educate your Fiori developers on common web application vulnerabilities. And SAP does have a guide out there called Protecting SAP Applications. There's a URL or a link to that at the bottom of the slide here. That's a great resource for training developers on common security application issues. This next slide is my cue to turn it back over to Sarah Lotman. So Sarah, if you're still on the phone, I'll go and let you take it from here.
Thank you, Gary. And before I get into this next part, I just want to tell everybody attending the webinar, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat. We're going to have at least 5 minutes at the end so we can get to those. And for those of you who do ask questions, if we are not able to get to them, we will absolutely find the answer and follow up with you at the conclusion of the webinar. So I just want to highlight a couple of the Fiori packages that NIMBL offers. First of all, we are an SAP certified partner to deliver these Fiori packages, and they have been quite popular as Fiori has just gained a lot of momentum since the Sapphire announcement that it now comes without an additional license cost. So the first one I'll touch on is the Fiori roadmap. this package is ideal for those customers who are brand new to Fiori, brand new to mobility, and really want expert advice and recommendations on what types of applications are available, as well as an assessment of the organization and really the business case as to what applications would be a good idea to pilot. So the second Jumpstart package that we offer, and the one that I would say has been the most popular, is the Jumpstart package. This is for customers who absolutely know they want Fiori, they want to go in, and so this is a fixed time period. We're talking about 6 weeks, and NIMBL will come in and we will do the end-to-end installation configuration to get your landscape up and running. We install 2 NetWeaver Gateway 7.4 servers. That's the SAP recommended way, is to have a central hub, which just means a separate server for deploying Fiori. And then we also follow all of the security guidelines that Gary touched on as far as the hardening activities. And finally, we will install and configure 10 standard SAP delivered Fiori applications of your choosing. So I just wanted to touch on that briefly. And Gary, if you are ready, we are now going to get to the Q&A. And it looks like we have quite a few questions queued up for you. So let's see. Marco has a question. Can you please provide more details on the web dispatcher not protecting against injection, XSS, and XSRF? Is that still the case if the web dispatcher is operating an SSL termination with re-encryption? So Gary, I'll let you take that one.
All right. Can you hear me okay, sir? Okay. So does web dispatcher handle these, again, we mentioned 2 common application security issues, injection or cross-site scripting? The answer is no, unfortunately. Even with encryption, you're just taking the attack and re-encrypting it and passing it back to the applications. In the case of an injection attack, if I'm passing in a string of HTML, an HTML request, a GET request, that is basically escaping one of my, basically using a hidden field and escaping a variable that I'm taking and adding, escaping it out and adding additional code, if you will, in there, whether it's SQL or OS commands for shell shock, so on and so forth. It's just going to blindly, it's not going to inspect that. It doesn't have any visibility into whether or not that's malicious or not. It's just going to re-encrypt that and pass it back in that SSL encryption or re-encryption scenario that you mentioned, Marco. So unfortunately, no.
Highlight this one because this is a very common one that I get from customers. Marcia asks, is there any way to automate the creation of gateway users from the backend? I.e., I want to authenticate to the backend or create a gateway account when the ERP account is created. So basically, do we have to have named users in both landscapes? And if so, how does the authentication between gateway and the ECC backend take place?
Okay, so this is a challenge. And again, I think what Marsh is concerned here about is complex. Basically, am I going to have another? If I have 400 Fiori users, am I going to have to manage them in 2 systems now? It's going to be significant management overhead. There are several things that you can do to simplify that, but going to the end of your question, which is, do I have to have named users in both? You could. There's nothing to prevent you from using like a service user. Organizations do use service accounts or shared accounts to, like common ones, a plant management or plant maintenance or scenario where you have people on a shop floor who are not power users, who are rarely looking at SAP, but they want to look at the next order in production planning. So you can use shared accounts, a lot of customers, though, from a SOX compliance perspective, not recommended. FDA compliance, PCI compliance. PCI would definitely say no shared accounts. So a lot of customers have challenges using shared accounts because of their compliance mandates. And it's also not really a best practice. So what options do you have to simplify that? If you're using named accounts, you can use CUA. It's not supported any longer by SAP, but it's still out there. It's still available. So you can provision use CUA to provision users in both systems or landscapes. At the same time, you can also use GRC, so SAP's GRC Access Request Management component or business role management can be used to, you can basically define a business role in your GRC environment for, say, a sales manager or a salesperson, and then they can, once they request that business role in GRC. GRC has the logic built in to automatically deploy the right roles for those users in the right systems. So SAP has the GRC system available. There's also other non-SAP products available. Like one is Curion that comes to mind. Basically, identity management or access request management solutions that are out there. You can leverage those to the extent they support SAP. And again, the only thing they really need to support is the ABAP application server stack. So if you have a vendor, identity management vendor, or a ARM vendor that supports ABAP AS, then you can leverage that as well. So I hope that answered your question, Marcia.
Perfect. Thank you, Gary. So this next question comes from Chandra, and this is something that I can cover. She asks, if the customer wants to use the SAP portal for centralized authentication, can SAP Fiori applications do that? And the answer to that question is yes, but it is also dependent upon the version of portal that you are running. Starting with the NetWeaver portal 7.31, it does have integration capabilities with the Fiori Launchpad. So you can absolutely, starting with that version, and of course with 7.4, you can absolutely consume Fiori via the portal. And another point to that is SAP does have a separate product called the mobile portal. And using the mobile portal, you can also embed the Fiori Launchpad. And the next question, again, is something I can cover. Brent asks, is the Fiori Launchpad configured and developed from a Windows server? And so the answer to that is no. SAP has a product called the Fiori Launchpad Designer. And once you install the Fiori components in your gateway server, it's just an SICF server or an SICF name service. So you simply launch it from SAP and provision and configure the Launchpad that way. I think we have time for just one more question, Gary. And like I said, for those of you who asked questions that we did not get to, we will absolutely follow up at the conclusion of the webinar with answers. But Kedar asks, how do we protect the data being brought via OData service? So how do we protect the gateway services that are coming from the ECC backend to the gateway server? And so Gary, I will let you take that one.
Okay, and this is, okay, bear with me. Kedar, okay, great. So Kedar, how do you pick the data being brought in via OData services? The biggest thing you want to do is inspect that or encrypt that in transit. So you would want to encrypt your, use SNC encryption, encrypt your RFC from your backend system to your gateway system as well. You also want to, it's outside of OData at this point, but you want to encrypt that traffic between your gateway and your clients. Again, you can use the Makana if you if you really want to get secure, or you can use leverage the capabilities of the gateway, NetWeaver gateway system to encrypt that traffic. And then it's kind of that's the quick answer. You can get into more detail. You basically want to ensure the overall security solution. So potentially you want to make, once that data gets to your endpoint, you want to make sure there's security around that. So that's where Makana and Fiore or another MDM might come into play. But the short answer is encrypt that traffic using encrypted RFC. Is that everything, Sarah?
Actually, we have a couple of more questions, and these are good ones. These are ones that we get from a lot of people. And so, Gary, just so you know, we have a couple of people asking this. They want to know, why do you put the NetWeaver gateway in the DMZ versus the intranet? And then Dieter says, that way you have to open the firewall to back-end systems also. So really, essentially, why are we putting gateway in the DMZ? And I'll let you take that one.
Okay. So it's a great question, Dieter. The biggest reason to place that in your DMZ is to inspect, to basically enforce business logic in your DMZ. So before you pass data into your data center, where the crown jewels supposedly are located, you want to make sure that that traffic is approved traffic. Again, web dispatcher, or if you're using relay server in the Fiore scenario, or just a reverse proxy, a generic reverse proxy, none of those really give you the ability to say, is this zip code that I'm being handed, does it meet our criteria for what a zip code is? And the 80211 happens to be NIMBL zip code. If I'm getting 80211 semicolon select star from a table name, I want to be able to detect that in the DMZ and enforce my business logic there. So say, this is not a valid zip code. Please try again. Ideally, you would also do client and server side validation. So your Fiori applications would have the logic built in to inspect it within the Fiori application to say, yeah, this is a valid zip code. So you get soft errors as opposed to hard errors. But you really do want to enforce your business logic in the DMZ primarily to prevent application attacks. There is theoretically, if you were using a web application firewall, I would submit that you could make the case if you're dealing with PCI, a PCI auditor, or you could make the case to an internal auditor that you are inspecting that traffic in the DMZ in your web application firewall. In that case, I would have reservations about it, but I wouldn't feel like I was doing customer big disservice if we had a gateway back in the data center.
Perfect. Thank you. And just a couple of more questions. Kedar here wants more information on what does Makana do. And maybe if we could do some comparisons between that and the Afaria solution.
So bear with me, guys. We're dealing with a technical issue here. So what does Makana do? Makana, again, it's not an SAP product. Makana is an SAP partner. Makana is basically a wrapper. It's actually one of the easier things to deploy in a Fiori or SAP SMP scenario. If you're deploying custom developed applications on an SMP server, you basically wrap that application with a Makana executable. It takes about 2 minutes. That wrapped application basically has extended logic to include things like encryption, creating the sandbox that the Makana application will run in, encrypt any data stored at rest, establish the secure tunnels or traffic from the application back to your data center as opposed to at the device level. So it's really a wrapper that is added to a deployed application. So you couldn't, if you were in a scenario where you had a Salesforce that was connecting to a Fiori service via like a browser, say they were using a Chrome within their mobile device, you could absolutely not wrap that the vendor supplied browser with Makana. You would have to deploy an application, and again, there's an application that anyone who's a Fiori customer or an SAP customer can download for free, the Fiori client. You can then take that Fiori client, wrap that, and deploy that. And in that scenario, you could use Makana.
Perfect. Thank you, Gary. And it looks like we have one last question. Michael wants to know, is Mobile Iron supported?
All right. So I'm going to be a little frank, Michael. I've had some exposure to Mobile Iron. I have not been a Mobile Iron customer. I've not even really evaluated it technically. I do know it's an MDM solution. It gives you pretty common MDM features. I think they have some data at rest encryption features, if I'm not mistaken. Excuse me. You can absolutely use that to enforce, again, password policies, to enforce, what trusted or what wireless connections you can use for Wi-Fi, to enforce things like, I only want you to install these 5 applications and nothing else. You could definitely use Mobile Iron. The one question I would have is, could you use Mobile Iron to deploy a Fiori, the Fiori client? And could you use Mobile Iron to deploy the Fiori client wrapped, with a Makana wrapper on it, the secure Fiori client? I'm not sure that you could. I'd need to do some more research on that, but you can definitely leverage Mobile Iron to get the basic security policy settings for your endpoint devices.
Great. Thank you. So it looks like you have answered all of the questions that we have coming in. So that concludes our webinar today. I'd just like to thank everyone for attending, and you see Gary and I's contact information up on the screen. Please feel free to reach out with any additional questions that you might have.